Maureen O'Hara, a name that once forced Hollywood to adjust its lighting the moment she stepped into the frame. With blazing red hair, icy blue eyes, and a rare kind of beauty that seemed to absorb color, she became the face the Technicolor era craved most. On screen, Maureen O'Hara embodied the strong woman, standing shoulder to shoulder with the most formidable men of classic Hollywood. She did not exist at the edge of the story. She stood at its center by sheer force of a presence that could not be dimmed. But that was only the surface the lights allowed the world to see. Behind those radiant frames lived another reality. A woman raised under strict discipline, entering Hollywood amid towering egos, and learning early that beauty was never a shield thick enough. In an industry accustomed to rewarding female obedience, Maureen O'Hara chose endurance through toughness, and paid for it with repeated exclusions from the spotlight. Maureen O'Hara was not born to be a muse. She was born with a sense of self-respect that functioned almost like an instinct for survival. Throughout her life, she learned to remain upright along fragile boundaries, between passion and control, between love and violence, between fame and her own safety. She did not turn pain into myth, nor did she trade tragedy for continued attention. Instead, she chose silence, departure, and beginning again, time and time again, as a way to preserve the part of herself Hollywood could never see. More than half a century later, the world still remembers Maureen O'Hara as the Queen of Technicolor, the most radiant woman of a radiant age. Yet behind that title was a real human being, one who loved deeply, endured quietly, mothered in solitude, and repeatedly chose to step away from glory when the cost of staying became too high. So the question remains, was the blinding light of fame ever enough to warm a woman who spent her entire life learning how to protect herself in the dark? Maureen O'Hara was born on August 17, 1920, in Ranelagh, a southern suburb of Dublin. She was the second of 6 children born to Charles Fitzsimons and Marguerite Fitzsimons. The family was not poor, but neither did it live in luxury. Life operated on order rather than display, with daily routines governed by restraint and discipline. Charles Fitzsimons ran a sporting goods business and later became involved in football administration with ties to Shamrock Rovers. He viewed sport as a system of training, one in which endurance mattered more than glory. Marguerite Fitzsimons was classically trained in operatic singing. Music was a constant presence in the household, but never as performance. Practice took place every day at fixed hours and was always tied to precision and repetition. All 6 children were exposed to the arts early on. Most of Maureen's siblings eventually pursued careers in performance or creative fields. Margot Fitzsimons became a film actress. Charles Fitzsimons worked as an actor before moving into production. James Fitzsimons was also active in theater and film. Only the eldest sister, Peggy, chose a religious life and stepped away from the arts entirely. It was a family full of working artists, but one with no concept of stardom within its walls. Marguerite Fitzsimons did not steer her children toward the stage as a final destination. Her emphasis was discipline. Vocal training, dance, and drama were treated as part of a basic education, on par with academic subjects. Art was not a means of attracting attention, but a way to train control of the body, the voice, and time itself. In that environment, talent was not praised early, and choosing the arts was never considered a privilege. The Fitzsimons household encouraged creativity, without indulgence, and that rhythm became the first foundation Maureen O'Hara carried with her for life. At the age of 6, Maureen began studying dance and drama. The training was neither exploratory nor expressive. It was repetitive, structured, and focused on physical control, rhythm, and memory. She was required only to do things correctly, do them fully, and repeat them until they met the standard. At 14, Maureen began appearing on stage in performances by local theater groups. This was not a moment of introduction or discovery. The stage arrived simply as the next extension of her training, governed by the same rules. Mistakes were not explained away, and errors were not softened for any reason. Standing before an audience therefore carried no sense of thrill. It resembled stepping into a timed shift with clearly defined expectations. By the time she was accepted into the Abbey Theater, that work rhythm became stricter but not unfamiliar. This was an environment that allowed no room for emotional outbursts or personal favoritism. Roles existed through discipline, memory, and stamina. Demands Maureen had already internalized over many years. For her, the stage was never a place to assert herself, but a place where one was required to stand firm through genuine capability. Alongside the arts, Charles Fitzsimons insisted that his daughter learn typing and bookkeeping, not to replace the stage, but to avoid dependence on it. That was how he viewed performance as a profession, fragile, unstable, and never something on which an entire life should rest. This lesson was never explained. It existed simply as a condition. Maureen's teenage years were clearly divided. School during the day, performances in the evening. Time was spent more on training than on reflection. There was no space to consider oneself exceptional. That rhythm became habit, worked through to the end without waiting for validation. In the late 1930s, when she left Ireland for London, she entered film studios with the mindset of a stage actress testing a different environment. Small roles, regular screen tests, a technical atmosphere, dry and cold. The camera offered no response, no judgment, no encouragement. Cinema did not move her emotionally at that point. It existed merely as a professional possibility, not yet a destiny. The turning point came when Charles Laughton took notice of her. Not because of a camera-friendly beauty, but because of something difficult to measure by market standards: the steadiness of a body forged through stage discipline. Laughton signed her to a 7-year contract, decisively placing Maureen on a cinematic trajectory. At the same time, the name Fitzsimons was replaced with O'Hara, a minor adjustment on paper, but one that marked the first moment her personal identity was folded into the logic of the marketplace. Cinema did not simply require an actress. It required a name that could be positioned. In 1939, Jamaica Inn was released. The role was not large, but it placed Maureen into a working rhythm entirely different from the stage. Every expression had to be restrained. Every emotion had to wait for the camera's angle. There was no room for getting ahead of the audience. That same year, The Hunchback of Notre Dame pulled her into a project of far greater scale and clear ambition. As Esmeralda, Maureen stood between two opposing forces: the visual brilliance of Technicolor and the tragic weight of the story. The film was a major success, produced with a substantial budget, earning multiple high-profile technical nominations and quickly securing its position within the studio system. The consequences followed almost immediately. RKO Radio Pictures purchased her contract and placed Maureen among the faces to be developed long-term. From this point on, she was no longer a stage actress, tentatively stepping into film, but an image in the process of being shaped. Hollywood's new Technicolor face. The lights grew brighter, opportunities multiplied, but at the same time, the center of gravity began to shift, from performance to image, from personal discipline to star strategy. A quiet tension took shape, not yet explosive, but strong enough to define how Maureen O'Hara would exist within the system, visibly present, yet always maintaining a distance that could not easily be closed. In 1941, How Green Was My Valley appeared at a moment when Hollywood was beginning to move away from loud spectacle toward more compressed structures of memory and family life. In the film, Maureen O'Hara played Ang Harad, a character not placed at the center of the narrative, but present with enough clarity to be impossible to overlook. Her character moves through the story in precisely calibrated pauses, glances that close before becoming confessions, emotions held back rather than released, personal desire yielding to communal obligation. There is no overt climax. The weight lies in what remains unsaid. On set, John Ford maintained a severe working rhythm. Actors were not permitted to push emotion beyond the film's overall structure. Any excess was eliminated. For O'Hara, this demanded a fundamental adjustment, abandoning stage habits, where large movement holds an audience, to work within the narrow limits of the frame. The role did not allow correction through intensity. A single misstep was enough to invalidate a take. When the film was widely released, the response was swift and decisive. How Green Was My Valley won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, surpassing several heavily favored films that year. Maureen O'Hara received no individual nomination, but Ang Harad became one of the most frequently cited female characters when discussing the film's emotional compression. Not because of screen time, but because of her irreplaceable position within the narrative structure. Soon after, color began to dominate how Hollywood organized movement and vision. On set, Maureen O'Hara worked under conditions that demanded continuous physical engagement. She climbed, clung to violently rocking ship decks, endured prolonged exposure to sun and wind, and maintained rhythm in scenes that allowed no margin for error. The labor was established before lighting and color completed the frame. The Black Swan was produced under those conditions. A dense shooting schedule placed direct demands on endurance and bodily control. The camera followed movement. The body had to adapt first. Fatigue never appeared on screen, but it was present throughout the process. The dazzling Technicolor light was the final result, not a protective condition. A few years later, as the war receded, American cinema expanded its narrative space toward the sea and the world of pirates. The Spanish Main placed Maureen O'Hara at the center of those conflicts. Her character did not exist as someone to be protected or waited for, but had to operate within the film's action rhythm, speaking, moving, and reacting as part of a continuous chain. Here, the image of the strong woman emerged not as a declaration, but as a consequence. Without sufficient strength, the role itself would collapse. In 1947, Sinbad the Sailor premiered, at a time when Technicolor had reached a level of brilliance that almost erased awareness of the labor behind it. Saturated colors, dense lighting, and carefully designed compositions made O'Hara a dominant visual focal point. But to maintain naturalness amid crowded scenes and relentless action rhythms, she had to preserve stamina, control movement, and regulate timing with precision, elements rarely acknowledged as part of female performance. At that moment, beauty was far easier to see than the work required to produce it. In 1949, when Maureen O'Hara stood at the height of her professional power as one of Hollywood's most important Technicolor faces, an offset incident exposed the true limits of what was called safety for female stars. According to O'Hara's later account in her memoir, "'Tis Herself," she was sexually assaulted by a powerful producer within the studio system during a meeting arranged under the guise of work. The incident did not occur in public, had no witnesses, and left no physical evidence that could force the system to respond through familiar legal channels. But what made it a turning point was not the act itself. It was how Hollywood handled what followed. O'Hara did not remain silent. She reported the incident to studio management. Instead of a transparent investigation, the first reaction came from the press. The tabloids of the period did not focus on who had done what, but redirected the story toward the moral standing of the accuser. Headlines questioned motives, virtue, and whether a famous actress was making too much of it. There was no formal indictment, no legal conclusion strong enough to close the case in a way that protected the victim. Instead, the story lingered ambiguously in the newspapers as a scandal, and that scandal attached itself to the woman who had spoken out. The consequences did not arrive as a public collapse, but as a familiar form of silent punishment within the studio system. Maureen O'Hara was not banned from acting. Her contract was not immediately terminated, but projects began to slow. Certain appropriate roles suddenly disappeared from consideration. Her relationship with the machinery of the system was no longer seamless. This was not expulsion, but a deliberate deceleration, enough to send a message, yet not clear enough to openly resist. Many decades later, as discussions of power, harassment, and cultures of silence in Hollywood acquired clearer language, Maureen O'Hara's story was finally revisited for what it was. Not a scandal, but a case that happened too early. At a time when a woman telling the truth could still be transformed into a moral test imposed upon her alone. In the early 1950s, when Against All Flags appeared, Maureen O'Hara's screen image was functioning so smoothly that it no longer required emphasis. She did not stand outside the action, nor was she obscured by her male co-stars. O'Hara's character existed as a true counterforce within the film's space, moving, colliding, and sustaining the rhythm of conflict through her own physical presence, without the need for narrative protection. This was happening before Hollywood had language for the term female action hero, and even before the concept itself became a marketable template. The title Queen of Technicolor was attached to O'Hara during those years as a convenient shorthand for her radiant on-screen presence. Technicolor thickened color, sharpened light, and made movement harder to conceal. On set, this meant that every unit of labor was magnified. Mistakes became visible, fatigue could not be hidden, and the demands placed directly on the body allowed no softening. Light completed the frame, but at the same time narrowed the margin of safety behind it. During this same period, O'Hara repeatedly turned down roles she felt distorted the image of Irish women or reduced her background to decorative stereotype. These decisions were not received as professional principles, but as signs of someone who didn't understand the rules of the game. The press and studio circles applied familiar labels: difficult, uncooperative, inflexible. At times, O'Hara confronted studios directly over contract disputes, an act that was nearly forbidden within the studio system era. The result was not a public collapse, but a quiet withdrawal from many safe roles, traded for a coherent image that did not require the system's approval. In an era when many actresses survived through compromise, the act of saying no became a conscious form of risk. When visual spectacle had been pushed to a point where it could no longer be intensified, cinema began searching for a different kind of compression. For Maureen O'Hara, that meant the center of gravity no longer rested in visual force alone. Alongside Technicolor action roles, she continued working with John Ford on larger-scale projects and entered into a series of films with John Wayne. Rio Grande opened onto a different terrain: clearer narrative structure, faster pacing, and explicitly defined commercial goals. Stable box office returns quickly turned the Ford-Wayne O'Hara collaboration into a familiar formula. Subsequent films such as The Wings of Eagles, McLintock, and Big Jake maintained that trajectory. Large productions, dense shooting schedules, and a firmly established working order. The on-screen chemistry between O'Hara and John Wayne was so strong that for decades, audiences and the press believed a real-life relationship must have existed between them. Yet, no credible evidence ever surfaced. O'Hara stated repeatedly that they loved each other in the language of respect. Hollywood media later described them as the most believable couple who never crossed the line, a rare instance of non-transgression in a system where backstage narratives often exceeded what appeared on screen, and where actors' private lives were routinely claimed by the images the public adored. The tension of that partnership reached its clearest expression in The Quiet Man. Filmed in Ireland, not as decorative backdrop, but as a landscape with its own memory-shaping behavior and narrative rhythm, the project marked O'Hara's return to her birthplace in a production with significant budget and clear commercial expectations. Two of her brothers were present on set, thinning the boundary between work and personal life more than usual. During a close-up sequence, the action did not stop at the correct moment. Maureen O'Hara's hand was broken on set. Filming did not halt. Medical treatment was administered, the incident briefly recorded, and then left behind so the production could continue. No backstage mythology was constructed around the accident. Upon release, The Quiet Man won 2 Academy Awards, Best Director and Best Color Cinematography, achieved strong box office returns, and quickly became one of the most frequently revisited works in the careers of John Ford and John Wayne. Maureen O'Hara's presence is inseparable from the film, not through proclamation or title, but through the fact that she stood fully inside the rhythm the work demanded. Within that structure, O'Hara did not steer the creative process, but neither was she pushed outside its axis. Her character appeared precisely at the script's points of tension, preserving conflict and necessity within the narrative flow. There were no moments engineered to mark personal distinction, only a repeated presence across production cycles, where standing in the right place mattered more than being named. After The Quiet Man, Maureen O'Hara was invited to remain within the same trajectory: strong, action-oriented female roles with proven box office value. Some experiences leave no visible trace on a set, yet are sufficient to alter how one regards subsequent offers. The proposals arrived fully formed, properly presented, as before. She simply did not sign. The contract remained on the desk until the end of the afternoon. The films that followed continued to be produced and released within clear power structures and with very little tolerance for deviation. No turning point was announced. Only a prolonged working rhythm, enough to push O'Hara steadily away from safe roles and place her under a different kind of pressure, not from failure, but from remaining within an order that no longer allowed movement. In the early 1960s, Maureen O'Hara returned to the screen in The Parent Trap. The film did not place her in the familiar terrain of action or physical conflict, but within the shifting family structure of post-war America. Her character existed in a gentler narrative rhythm, stable, anchoring, and quietly guiding. The film became a major popular success, replayed continuously across generations, and introduced O'Hara into the childhood memories of an entirely different audience. That appearance did not open a new phase of her career, but it confirmed something else. She had never left the public's memory. She was simply no longer positioned at the center of the system as before. After The Parent Trap, Maureen O'Hara's appearances on the big screen diminished noticeably. She did not move into the familiar cycle of middle-aged female roles Hollywood typically offered, nor did she attempt to maintain visibility through safe repetitions. This absence was never announced as a withdrawal, nor accompanied by any formal explanation. It unfolded quietly, over many years, more like a condition that settled in than a decision that demanded justification. As cinema gradually narrowed the space available to older female roles, television opened up a different working rhythm. Maureen O'Hara appeared regularly in television films, special programs, and talk shows. There, she was not required to maintain a fixed image or carry symbolic weight. Television allowed for presence without centrality, the role of interlocutor, rhythm holder, or simply a familiar voice. Music, in fact, had been there from the very beginning, long before the color frame. As the space on the silver screen continued to contract, O'Hara returned to her voice and to the Irish cultural structures formed in her childhood. She recorded folk songs with a restrained approach, refusing to turn them into market products. The recordings were slow, clearly articulated, faithful to traditional form. On stage, O'Hara stood like someone long accustomed to the discipline of live performance. No editing, no concealment, no margin if the rhythm faltered. Audiences came for the voice, but stayed for the sense of a cultural current being preserved intact. Music and television gradually became parallel paths. They did not replace cinema, but they allowed O'Hara to continue working in spaces that did not question age in the way Hollywood typically did. There was no declaration of retreat, no explanation for the shift. Everything followed the same logic that had repeated itself throughout her professional life. When one space began to close, O'Hara did not try to force it open with past fame. She moved elsewhere, to places that still allowed her to work fully. Maureen O'Hara's work no longer revolved around a single axis. The lights dimmed. Her presence dispersed across multiple spaces. The rhythm of work continued, without a role waiting in advance, and without a position that needed prior confirmation. And it was precisely in that state, when she was no longer embedded in the daily machinery of production, that Hollywood finally turned back to call Maureen O'Hara's name. In 2014, O'Hara appeared at an award ceremony in a wheelchair. American media collectively described the moment as a belated apology. An overdue recognition. Hollywood finally apologizes. At the age of 94, she did not deliver a long speech, nor attempt to rewrite history. Only a single sentence was spoken and quoted repeatedly in the days that followed. This is very meaningful to me. There was no reconstructed climax, no need to seal emotion. The recognition arrived late. After all, the essential choices had been made long before. Maureen O'Hara's career was only fully named once she was no longer standing at its center. From that interval of quiet, her private life came into clearer view, not as a marginal footnote to her career, but as a parallel space that had always operated alongside it. For Maureen O'Hara, marriage did not appear as a harbor after fame. It appeared as a life she believed she could enter without losing herself. She did not seek protection. She sought a rhythm of existence that could stand beside her work, where love did not demand silent sacrifice, and respect was not something that had to be requested each day. But unlike the film set, where all boundaries are drawn in advance, private life opens without warning of the fractures that lie within it. Her first marriage came very early in 1939, when Maureen O'Hara was still at an age when many things were believed to sort themselves out with time. George Brown entered her life not through a love story, but through a formality. The two of them barely had the chance to build a shared life in any real sense. There were no repeated mornings, no small habits sustained long enough to turn into memory. The marriage dissolved quickly, so lightly it seemed to leave no wound at all. Yet precisely because of that, it left behind a void. The sense that a marriage could end without a clear cause, and that leaving did not necessarily come with an explanation for what happened to trust. In the years that followed, as Maureen O'Hara's film career pulled her into an increasingly relentless work rhythm, her body and mind stretched continuously by non-stop shooting schedules. She entered another relationship with a caution shaped by earlier experience. Will Price did not arrive as an impulse. He appeared as a promise of order, someone who might keep private life from slipping out of reach while everything else accelerated. In 1941, she married again, at a time when work intensity remained high and pressure unrelenting. At first, there was a feeling of being cared for. Gradually, that care changed shape. Money left her hands without argument. Small decisions were replaced by short phrases. "Let me handle it." There was no alarm moment, no single breaking point, only a low, persistent unease accumulating day by day, as if the ground beneath her feet were tilting very slowly, enough to unsettle balance but not enough to be named. When alcohol became a familiar part of daily rhythm, silences began to outlast words, and control took on the appearance of responsibility. When Maureen O'Hara became pregnant, it did not bring the softening people often expect. Her body began to change, while the life around her kept its old pace. If anything, harsher. Fatigue could no longer be concealed behind shooting schedules. Pain could not be postponed through professional discipline. Yet in private space, everything continued to operate as though nothing required adjustment. At this point, conflicts moved beyond what could be called ordinary disagreement. They crossed into violations, enough for the body to register danger before the mind could name it. Not prolonged, not loud, but sufficient for the body to remember what consciousness had not yet fully identified. There was no outside intervention, no witnesses, and nothing preserved as clear evidence. Only a woman forced to learn how to remain upright within her own body, day after day, in a living space that allowed no deviation and did not tolerate weakness, even during pregnancy. Maureen O'Hara did not speak of it. She kept working, kept to schedules, completed scenes that demanded endurance her body was steadily losing. Pregnancy did not become a protected state for her. It became something she had to safeguard herself, quietly, discreetly, without letting it show. Only when she realized that limits once sufficient to protect herself were no longer enough for another life, did the thought of leaving emerge. Not in panic, not in tears, but in a harsh clarity. There are things one can endure alone, but cannot carry once another body depends entirely on you. The birth of Bronwyn did not bring a miracle. It brought clarity. Motherhood did not weaken Maureen O'Hara. It stripped away the confusion between endurance and sacrifice. What she had once silently accepted for herself became unacceptable when a child's safety rested fully in her hands. The relationship ended in 1953. Maureen O'Hara left as a single mother, while her career continued at full speed, unwilling to wait for private life to recover. Will Price's later death did not bring closure. Many years had passed by the time the news reached Maureen O'Hara, no longer as a wife and no longer in a position to ask direct questions. She later acknowledged carrying suspicions, but she did not turn them into accusations. There was no conclusion, no moment of release. That gray area remained in memory like a heavy mass, not dismantled, not erased, merely set aside because life at that time did not allow her to stop and look back again. The years that followed passed without marking a new beginning in Maureen O'Hara's emotional life. Work, motherhood, and the effort to keep life from drifting off its familiar track filled her days entirely. Love did not disappear, but it moved away from the center. No longer something to trust fully, nor a place to stake emotion. There was no decision to close it off, and no search to replace it. Only time continuing forward, slow enough for change to occur without ever needing to be named. Charles Blair entered Maureen O'Hara's life at a different moment, after she had passed through the most violent chapters of her private life and no longer approached love with a need to be rescued. Blair did not belong to the world of cinema. He was not drawn into the lights, not shaped by shooting schedules or public image. He came from aviation, a field in which every decision carries immediate consequences and where the idea of a role does not exist. For him, risk was measured in mechanics, weather, and accountability, not in emotion. Their relationship developed slowly, without the shape of compensation. Maureen O'Hara did not seek protection in Blair, and he did not seek a symbol in her. What connected them was something both familiar and new: the ability to exist side by side in work and in life, without either having to diminish themselves. When the decision to commit was made, it did not bring loud romance, but a practical shift. Shared life drew Maureen O'Hara away from Hollywood, not as a retreat, but as a choice. In the Virgin Islands, she entered a rhythm entirely different from film production. Antilles airboats did not operate on fame. It survived on schedules, legal structures, finances, and decisions that had to be made at the right moment. There, Maureen O'Hara was not recognized first as a star. She was present as someone who shared responsibility, where every deviation carried a cost. In that space, love was no longer the sole emotional center. It existed alongside work, obligation, and a daily life. No need to prove itself. No need to be concealed. No need for silent sacrifice to maintain an image. For Maureen O'Hara, this was a rare period in which private life did not require constant defense. Not because risk had vanished, but because she no longer entered it with the naivete of her early years. The plane crash in 1978 cut through that life without warning. No farewells, no preparation, only an immediate void, within love, within family, and across the entire working structure the two had carried together. This time, loss did not allow Maureen O'Hara to withdraw. She stayed, took over the business, and confronted legal and financial pressures, along with skeptical scrutiny directed at a woman never trained for such a role. Maureen O'Hara continued running the airline for a period of time, not as a symbol of resilience, but as someone who refused to let another structure collapse. Operations maintained their rhythm. Decisions were made when required. Grief existed, but it did not precede responsibility. At this stage, family was no longer a refuge for emotion, but a space where every choice carried tangible consequences. If cinema gave O'Hara image and fame, then marriage and family life stripped away any illusion of safety. There was no light to conceal exhaustion, no editing to correct mistakes, no role to hide behind. Only a woman standing in real life, moving forward not because she had overcome pain, but because retreat was no longer an option. In her later years, she lived for a time in Ireland, then returned to the United States, eventually settling in Idaho near her family. Leaving the center followed the same logic that had guided her entire working life. Finish what must be done, and do not return. At an age when many legends are invited to reflect publicly, O'Hara chose a quiet rhythm, one in which life no longer needed validation through image. Her health declined in the natural course of aging. Movement slowed. Long journeys were reduced. Public appearances grew infrequent and then ceased, not because of a specific diagnosis, but because her body no longer needed to answer to anyone else's pace. Time was divided among small, repetitive routines: reading, listening to music, talking with loved ones, watching days pass without the need to mark them. Family became the practical center of this life, not through loud gatherings, but through steady presence. O'Hara lived as an older woman accustomed to self-discipline, maintaining her own rhythm, making no demands, and creating no distance through titles. The media was not avoided, but neither was it invited. Absence unfolded naturally, as though the decision had long been made. On October 24, 2015, Maureen O'Hara passed away in her sleep in Boise, Idaho, at the age of 95. The news was delivered plainly, closing a life that had long ceased to place itself at the center of public attention. She was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery beside her husband, Charles Blair, a choice rooted in family life rather than cinematic legacy. Across more than 60 years of work, O'Hara appeared in over 60 films, not as a chain of peaks, but as consecutive cycles of labor. Her roles did not exist to explain strength. Her characters were not written as exceptions. They did not require trauma to justify toughness, nor a romantic arc to secure centrality. They stood within the frame as part of the story's internal logic. Remove them, and the structure would lose balance. On set, this translated into concrete technical demands, enduring harsh shooting conditions, maintaining rhythm within action, working without emotional downtime to recover. These demands were not framed as special challenges for women, but as ordinary labor conditions. And it was precisely that ordinariness that mattered. When Hollywood began narrowing space for older female roles, O'Hara's position did not collapse with the system. She could reduce her presence without losing professional stature, because what she left behind was not an image that needed maintenance, but an operational standard. Women can exist long-term in cinema when they are written and treated as part of the structure, not as exceptions requiring protection. The honorary Oscar in 2014 arrived very late. It did show, not reopen a chapter, nor did it close a legend. It simply confirmed what had long been true. Some careers only become fully visible once they no longer require light to sustain them. Throughout her career, O'Hara never operated according to the logic of entertainment journalism. She did not construct a tragic image, did not capitalize on scandal, and did not sell her private life to maintain attention. Her silence was not avoidance, but a form of control. This left the media both curious and disarmed. There was no story to exploit and no resistance to confront. Refusing to play by press rules became a consistent choice, and that choice allowed O'Hara's image to outlast news cycles that depend on constant exposure. What remains is not a template to be copied, but a ground that has been firmly compacted. On that ground, women can be hard, can be flawed, can be disliked by market standards, and still not be written as a problem requiring resolution. Later generations step onto it without knowing who leveled it. They only know that standing there makes work possible. Maureen O'Hara did not leave cinema as someone pushed to the margins, nor did she stay on to defend an image that had completed its historical task. She stepped away at the right moment, following the same logic that governed her entire life and career. When a structure no longer needs you to function, there is no reason to remain simply to preserve presence. In that quiet, when no naming is required, Maureen O'Hara's place in film history becomes clearest, not as an icon to be celebrated, but as a condition that has been established, so that cinema can continue without exclusion.